If we can create an environment where we have trust and respect and regard for one another and trust that each other is, really holding a high bar, we'll have a much healthier culture and a much greater chance of success.
You're listening to HR Superstars, a podcast brought to you by 15Five. On this show, we talk to strategic people leaders who are making a meaningful impact in their organizations and shaping the future of work. So get ready to be inspired and discover the secrets behind building high-performing teams and fostering a culture of growth and thriving. The future of HR starts here. Hi, everyone. I'm Karina Young, VP of People at 15Five, and today I have a very special guest with me. I'm joined by our own CEO, David Hassell. David stepped back into the CEO seat at 15Five, and it's really created a powerful moment of reflection and momentum here for us. He has a unique view into what's shifting the world of work, how the role of HR continues to evolve, and what leaders are being called to do differently right now. We'll talk about what he's seeing across the HR landscape, what's changing in leadership, and why this moment feels so important, both to him as our CEO, but also just as a leader. We'll talk about something deeply meaningful to David and our company, conscious leadership. David recently led our entire organization through a conscious leadership training over several weeks, and it shaped how we show up, communicate, and lead together. We're going to explore why this work matters to him and how he and we at 15Five are investing in leadership that creates an impact for everyone. So let's get started. David, first of all, welcome. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast. This is a really special moment to bring you on and have you here.
Thank you, Karina. It's great to be here.
For folks who don't know you or meeting you for the first time on this podcast, can you give us the movie trailer version of your life and how you ended up here on HR Superstars today?
So I graduated from college in 1998, and I had great aspirations to eventually build an HR tech company. Actually, no, I had none of that. I went off into the world and I was a computer engineer, and I worked for a big consulting company that has since it was a public company, 7,000 people, that's since gone out of business. And my experience coming out of school after, many years of study and training and all this hope and optimism about what I'd be doing was deflated a little bit as I ended up being relegated to this windowless computer lab in the back room of this office building in Roseland, New Jersey that I called Beige Cubicle Land. And I didn't get to see the sun for 11 hours a day while I was building health insurance tech for this company.
Do you mean that was not personally fulfilling for you?
That was not personally fulfilling. Now, it probably would have been more fulfilling, I think, if the company had helped me understand the connection between my work and actual, kind of human outcomes, because that, is a direction I definitely took my life and career after that. I had a great manager, but I think the corporate culture wasn't really exciting for me. And it did propel me into entrepreneurship earlier than probably I would have otherwise. And I started an advertising technology company in New York City at the height of the dot-com boom in 1999. Ran that for 7 or 8 years, went through the boom, went through the bust, built a sustainable enterprise. But I actually got burned out. I was working, essentially 2 jobs. I would come into the office at 8 or 9 in the morning and do my COO job. And then around 6 or 7 at night, when everyone left, I'd do my coding job until about 1 or 2 in the morning. And I would do that every day for weeks on end. And eventually said, wow, this isn't sustainable anymore. And I ran off to Brazil and started an adventure travel company for kite surfers. Because in my mind, people were like, oh, go follow your passion. I'm like, this sounds great. I need a break. And so I did that for a few years. It was personally fulfilling in many ways, but not at a deeper purpose level. And eventually I realized, okay, I want to use my skills in technology. The SaaS industry was kind of taking off in 2010. And I said, I see this opportunity to build technology for good. And I can use all my skills as a software engineer to go into technology and build something that, in my mind, the fundamental table stakes was I wanted to build something that was very scalable, that could sustain my life and my family, but also wanted to make a significant, meaningful, positive impact in people's lives. And so the world of work made a lot of sense. And actually, we didn't start out as an HR tech company. I started out building a product for managers and CEOs to lead better teams and to have better business results around, while also having really good human results and good cultural results, and building environments where companies won in the marketplace by supporting their people and thriving rather than at the expense of them. Because I didn't really have that in that first job out of school. And then eventually we got pulled into the world of HR, and I learned all about HR on the job. And as I was building a product for HR leaders who also care about building great company cultures and doing great business, but with a human bent to it.
Well, it's so interesting to see the swing that you took from these very corporate jobs, like not even your 9 to 5, but like your 9 to 5 and then your 6 to 1,
Yes.
going off to Brazil, doing something totally different, and then finding this world in between. What was your impression of HR before you really started working with them as part of 15.5? Did you have experiences that kind of shaped your own perspective or what you thought about this function?
I didn't have a ton because I never, again, I'd spent about 10 months working inside of a large company and had been an entrepreneur ever since. So, I'd heard things, HR not always held in the best light by employees. I'd heard, things about how they were really just focusing on protecting the company or the administrative sides of the role. But as we started to get pulled into it, I felt like there was a real sea change happening where HR had been vying for more of a seat at the table, wanting to be experienced as having more value in the organization. And there was actually a shift from that desire to that actually starting to happen. I know there was a firm that we worked with called Sapient Insights that was actually tracking the perception of HR over time over the last decade of what percentage of executives saw HR as a strategic function. And just about 2 years ago, it finally topped 50% on this trend to where I think it arguably deserves to be. And so, we were kind of in that moment where, these kind of legacy perceptions that I'd heard about were actually starting to shift when companies, I think, were finally waking up to what I saw, which was that the most important potential inside organizations lives with its people. And HR has a huge opportunity to influence that.
Well, that's so cool that you came in without a lot of the typical baggage that most executives and leaders have, right? They've worked with HR or they've worked in the more traditional ways, kind of have this framework that can be really hard to navigate out of. To your point, it was for managers first and executives and leaders. That's who you were getting at, but then realizing HR has a leverage point and an influence in there too. So when you think about the landscape of HR today, what feels most different today for HR and HR leadership than it did when you started 15.5?
Yeah, well, I think the last few years have been, oh my God, a roller coaster. I remember being at an event just about, I think it was over New Year's as we were entering 2020. There were some people there who were some musicians, and they started to riff on this thing, and they arrived on this like set of lyrics that was like something about the soaring 20s and how we're, it's like, a playback to the roaring 20s of the 1920s. Like we're entering this incredible era. The 2020s are going to be amazing. And 2 months later, we're like in total shutdown and we're going into COVID. And then, and then the economy taking a turn in 2022 as interest rates rose. And it just feels like it has been challenge upon challenge for so many leaders and navigating a lot of uncertainty. And now we look down this barrel of AI and this technology that I believe is going to be more transformative than the Industrial Revolution in ways that we cannot know or predict. And so that level of uncertainty, one of the things I've been tracking for probably over a decade now, maybe 15 years, is the idea that exponential technology we're in this era of exponential technology. Technology is improving at an exponential rate. And as humans, we didn't evolve to understand exponentials. There are certain things in nature that are exponential, like bacterial growth and things like that. But generally, we can't quite understand how, like if you ask someone, what's 8 plus 8, they can figure that out. But if you say, what's 8 times 8 times 8, it takes a moment. Like it's just not intuitive what that number is, and it compounds. And so we're on this curve that we can't quite like locate ourselves. And so that can lead to a sense of like anxiety and uncertainty that I think a lot of leaders are feeling. And not to mention, many organizations are more cash constrained and they're not growing headcount as much. And they're, being asked to embrace all of this technology. And there's some fears that, is this technology going to take my job? And, all of these different things that we're trying to navigate. So I would say that the big shift in the last 5 years has been HR leaders having to lead through a very uncertain time with lots of change. And, just staying grounded in the now while doing their best to move into, an uncertain future.
So what do you see that HR leaders are being asked to hold or carry now that they weren't a few years ago before this transformation started? Yeah,
I think this shift, as I talked about, from HR being more of a compliance-oriented administrative function and a cost center to being more of a strategic partner in the organization, which is by and large what a lot of HR leaders really wanted. They wanted that seat at the table. there's a bit of a double-edged sword because it's come with all of those responsibilities of the strategic side of HR, which is helping to actually drive the organizational effectiveness, be a partner to the CEO to understand, do we have the right systems and goal setting and performance management and all these things to drive better results in the organization. But they haven't had to stop doing all the administrative things, the things that were part of the legacy part of the role. So it's been, in some cases, a blessing and a curse in that now there's a bigger plate, there's more of a seat at the table for many leaders, and sometimes a lot of those administrative things, which can be very reactive. You don't know if you're going to have an HR issue. You start the week on Monday. There could be something on Thursday. You have no idea that's going to come out of the blue. And then, that can really impact your ability to kind of stay on track with, whatever strategic plans that you have been operating with.
It's a great way to describe what I feel, and I think a lot of HR leaders feel, is just this underlying tension in our work of what we have to do. Is there is a very real world of just the compliance, the tactical, the practical, the surprises that happen day by day that just have to get done, versus this transformation we are all trying to make toward that organizational effectiveness, the strategic, thinking about technology. And it's very hard to let those two things live in the same place. It kind of makes me think of even the journey you described for yourself earlier in your careers. How do we find the job, right? That we have to get things done. We have to care for our family. We've got to do the things we need to do, but we also want to thrive. It's those tensions exist for all of us in so many different ways on different levels. And as you described that, it just made me think that's just a very real world that HR leaders navigate. And I'm sure all leaders do in their own way, are kind of fighting their own battle there.
For sure.
When you kind of look at just overall the organizations and the other leaders that you know in this industry, how do you see the mindset around leadership in general changing, and performance and people? Because to your point, right, with COVID and all of the change and transformation there was a peak where everything was very, very highly centralized, people focused. Then things shifted a little bit and people are trying to figure out what is what. Where do you think the future of leadership is going?
I've been through enough cycles now to understand that at certain times in an economy, you might have more of an employer's market or an employee's market, right? And so almost like in the home buying market, is it a buyer's market or a seller's market, right? And so during the employees market, when there's such fierce competition for talent, a lot of times companies are increasing as many benefits as they can, and they're really reacting to employee concerns and whatnot. And then when there's the labor market's a little more, less competitive, then companies are more focused on, no, we need the right results and aggressively performance managing and not bowing to kind of every employee whim. And I feel like we're more in the latter now at the moment. It feels like a big shift from kind of the 2019, even 2020 timeframe to now. So there's that. And then with the shift in terms of AI and automation, AI, I think, is going to start to be able to handle a lot of the rote administrative work in all of our lives across all of our businesses, and elevate and allow leaders to then focus on more of that human leadership aspect, which is showing up and inspiring people and setting direction and having people feel engaged and aligned to the right priorities and doing work that really moves the company forward. And so I think, a lot of times people would talk about IQ versus EQ. And there was an era maybe 15 years ago where people were saying we need EQ now, IQ is not enough. IQ is going to be automated by AI, right? In a lot of ways, right? Some of these systems are wildly intelligent already, but there's a possibility that leads us to an even more human world and an even more greater need for leaders to have really deep emotional intelligence and be able to connect and lead to inspire and drive the business forward from the human side of the equation.
Yeah, I love that perspective. It's unique because most people look at AI and they think about it with fear, right? And with the glass half empty and taking everything away that is human. And so what do you think inspires you to look at AI and see that possibility with it and see that possibility to elevate human capability?
And I want to note, I do think it's a possibility and it's not a certainty. There are a lot of things that AI can go in a lot of different directions. They are building AI systems that are really remarkable at mimicking empathy and human connection. People are forming relationships with these machines because they've really understood some of the human psychology and can mimic in ways. And so, but that said, our entire economy, the reason we even have an economy is because no individual human being is self-sufficient on their own. We all need to trade and transact to take care of the myriad human needs that we have. And because of a monetary system, we've been able to specialize in so many different areas to service people's needs and wants. And in a post-AI world, in a post-AGI world, human needs are not going away. right? People are still going to want to transact. They're still going to have desires. They're still going to want to provide value in some ways. And I suspect we're going to find a way through that. So there is a chance where some of these AI companies get their wish, which is to make all human intellectual labor basically the price of electricity. And so where does that leave us? We are going to have to evolve. And I just think it's the fundamental kind of principles of what drives human beings aren't going away. And so I don't know what that future system looks like, but I kind of anchor on that.
Employee engagement is the ultimate driver of your organization's performance. So it's one thing to measure it, but 15Five's performance management platform helps you maximize engagement with easy, customized surveys that transform your data into guided actions with clear results. Learn more at 15five.com or click the link in the show notes.
Let's talk a little bit about conscious leadership, because
Yes.
it's obviously been a big topic for us recently at 15Five and a big part of your life and development. Take me back a little bit to how you even came across conscious leadership and why it connected with you.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I was actually at a conference, I think probably around the time I was founding 15Five, called Wisdom 2.0. And it was a conference in San Francisco started by a guy named Soren Gordhammer, I think is his name. And this was as social media was kind of taking the fore and technology was really becoming part of our lives. And he wanted to create a conversation around, how do we maintain our kind of humanity in the face of technology, which is an probably even more important conversation even in this moment. And I happened to walk into a room where one of the founders of Conscious Leadership was talking about some of their ideas. And I walked out with two handouts, one with this concept of what they call being above and below the line, and one about the four states of consciousness from which you might lead from in any given moment. And it was just so simple and profound for me that I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I started seeing the world through this lens. And afterwards, I started kind of like having intersections with people who had done the work. I didn't necessarily seek it out to study more. Later I was invited to be on a board with the founder of Whole Foods, John Mackey, and I was at his ranch down in Austin, and I was walking with a gentleman named Michael Beckwith, who is the, minister at this Agape church in LA. He mentioned something that sounded an awful lot like the 4 ways of leading. And one of the 4 ways of leading is like, life is happening to me. I'm the victim. It's characterized by the drama triangle, like, victim, villain, hero. You're in a story about, man, this really sucks, and this thing's happening to me, and that person's the problem. Karina, you're the problem. There's someone I'm blaming. And many of us find ourselves in that state, given any sort of fear, anxiety, tension in our bodies, all these things. It's a very common human experience. Many of us drop what we call going below the line into a to-me state multiple times a day. And now, when you are able to relax and find some sense of safety and trust, or do things to move what we call being above the line, you might find yourselves in one of 3 other states. One of them is by me, where I am now the creator or the challenger or the coach instead of the victim, villain, and hero. And I now have agency and I'm going to make things happen, right? And I feel really empowered. I'm not a victim to anything. I can do this, right? It's that kind of energy. You might step up a little further into a state called through me, which more feels like flow. It's like, oh my God, things seem to be just happening. I'm just like in the flow. Things are happening. I'm co-creating with life. I don't have to do all of it. Somehow I'm in this current of life and things are just happening. It feels kind of magical and I'm surrendering. And so it turns out you add, responsibility when you're in a by me state and you get to me. Or in a to me, you get to by me. You add surrender and you go into through me. And then, of course, there's like a unity consciousness as me, which, unless you had like a peak spiritual experience, we don't really do that at work. But generally, most people at work find out that they're in to me, by me, or through me. So I'm walking with Michael Beckwith on John Mackey's ranch, and he says something. And I'm like, oh my God, Michael, this sounds like this amazing conscious leadership model that I learned. And I walk him through the whole thing. And he goes, David, that's my work. And then he brings me back to the time he was giving a sermon at Agape when he claimed he had a through me experience and had this download and shared this with his congregation. And sure enough, I get home, I open the Conscious Leadership book, and there's Michael Beckwith credited with the thing. So I'm like, well, that was kind of cool. So anyway, that's how I kind of discovered this. And then one day, one of our investors came to the 15Five office. His name's Dave Cash, and he's a really wonderful human being and great coach, CEO coach. And he said that he was on his way to a Conscious Leadership forum. And he said, I think you'd be interested in this work. And I said, oh my God, Dave, I love this work. I've looked at this years ago. So that found me in a small group for 3 years studying with one of the founders of Conscious Leadership about this work. And it completely changed the way that I viewed my life. It helped me to kind of understand when I got into these patterns of being in a below the line to me state and the negative impact that would have on my emotions, myself, the people around me. And so that skill allowed me to start to work more effectively with other people around me.
Do you have an idea that you were ineffective before conscious leadership? Like, were you actively seeking something like, man, I want to be better, I want to learn different skills, something doesn't feel right? Or is it in some ways as magical as you described, that kind of like through me experience of like, you just happened to be going through life and this thing intersected and it really was just a great moment of connection?
It was more like that. And I feel like I've had enough of those experiences in my life where, I'm on one track and then something just finds me. And then sometimes it does feel very kind of through me magical in that way. This really, I think, impacted me at a deep level and gave me a level of awareness of myself and others that wasn't there. I think that's the power of really great models, of language and models that, because one of the things actually that I studied elsewhere that maps very well to conscious leadership is that in any given moment, as human beings, we're taking in about 11 million bits of sensory input per second. And so we have all sorts of sensory input. A lot of the stuff is completely unconscious. Our body's using that in terms of our temperature and our touch and whatever. But our conscious minds are only aware of 40 of those bits. So 11 million down to 40. So which 40 are we perceiving right now? And it turns out, depending on what state you're in, you're going to see different things. Depending on what language you have, if you don't have a word for something or a model, you're not going to see it. So all of our background, our beliefs and our history and the language that we have and the things we're able to notice are based on what language we already have. And then our conscious state also becomes this filter. And so you'll find that there's stories of this all the time. 3 people witnessed a car accident and 3 people have 3 completely different stories. And so, well, what's true and what's real? Well, there's probably some truth in all of their stories, but they perceive things differently. Maybe it was just the angle they were looking at the situation, but it might also have been the state that they're in. And you mentioned earlier this kind of sense of tension, because there's like this uncertainty and all this work that we have, we all feel tension. Turns out when we get tension in our bodies, even if we're unaware, like I heard someone say like stress is just the type A word for fear, or something like that, right? So it's like we all feel this level of stress. And if we're tight in our bodies and we're feeling uncertainty about the future, we might find ourselves below the line and not even know it. And when there might be this subtle story we're telling ourselves of like, I can't believe this happened, and I can't believe that person did that, and oh, woe is me, and this, I'm stuck in this situation, there's nothing I can do, or you're beating yourself up for something you said or didn't do. And from that place, you are going to perceive the world very, very differently than if you were more above the line. Now, oftentimes, to get there, first you have to notice. So they say in conscious leadership, the number one skill is actually just locating yourself and simply saying, in this moment, am I above the line or below the line? And neither are good, neither are bad, per se, but they're different. And just like taking an elevator in a building, you could, take the elevator up to the second floor and be in a by me state by taking responsibility for the situation. You'll see the situation differently. You'll have more options to act. Take the elevator up another level and, add in surrender, and you're now in a through me state, and you feel more at ease, and life is just flowing. And there are things you can, do with your breath and your body and your movement and to de-stress and detension that can help you, see that. Looking out the window from the third floor, the second floor, or the first floor, you're seeing different angles on the same situation. So that's the analogy one can take, that how powerful it is that the world isn't always exactly as we think we see it. It's very much filtered through our perception and our state of consciousness.
And would you say that it is that sense of fear that most often pulls people below the line or makes it hard to get back above?
Yes. Whether we or they admit it or not. This is a very, very deeply human thing. In fact, the folks at Conscious Leadership said, I think they have a phrase where they say, 98% of the world is below the line 95% of the time. So whether that's true or not, I don't know if they did a survey, but we thrive on below the line narratives and stories, right? Like all reality TV is all about, we get hooked into the drama. Yeah. Like you think, like most great movies have these stories of the villain and the thing and who's going to do the, what's going to happen. And so there's something very deeply human and satisfying, but I find it's kind of more like a junk food satisfaction. It doesn't really nourish you. Below the line typically is characterized by some sense of fear or scarcity. When we're afraid, when we feel like something is not going our way and we don't have the agency for that, we'll invent stories, and the stories we tell ourselves about the situation will predictably have those elements of there's a victim in the story, there's a villain in the story, and there might be a hero in that story too, which is someone who isn't really trying to solve the problem, but they're trying to placate the situation.
I think anyone would hear what you're talking about and be able to locate how this fits into their personal life, right?
Yes.
They could think of a situation, a coworker, a family member, somebody at the grocery store who sent them below the line or takes them there. So why bring this to 15.5, like our employees and our culture? What did you see as the value and what were you hoping for in sharing this with the company?
Yeah, so a couple of things there. And I would say oftentimes when you start doing this work, it's easier to notice when someone else is below the line versus noticing when you're below the line. So once you have this, you're like, oh, wow, that person's below the line. And then, of course, you're below the line about them being below the line and you're making them wrong for it.
But it takes a while
so it takes
to
a
connect
minute.
it.
So, but once you kind of get it and you realize like, oh, that's just a human thing and I get it. That person is probably feeling some fear or anxiety. What if I actually create some safety for that person, right? What if I actually create more space for that person? Right? What if I say like, man, I was below the line an hour ago, and so like I'm not going to fault them for it. And so why bring it to 15.5 was in many, many cultures, when things are stressful, you will find people will go below the line. And what do they do when they go below the line? They will start to make up stories about their coworkers, about how they're wrong and they're at fault and they should have done this. And they might start gossiping about it. You know, what gossip does, as opposed to going to direct and clearing up the situation with that person, is you're propagating these negative stories about other people. And then you're essentially eroding the social fabric of the organization where there's a lot of distrust, right? You'll often see this manifest in organizations where, you know, sales is pointing the finger at engineering when they're not hitting the numbers, or, you know, engineering's pointing the finger at sales and saying they're selling vaporware and they shouldn't be doing that and they sold things we don't do. And we have all this finger pointing inside the organization as opposed to realizing, hey, we're all on the same team. Like if we can create an environment where we have trust and respect and regard for one another and trust that each other is, you know, really holding a high bar, you know, we'll have a much healthier culture and a much greater chance of success. And so I view all of that, you know, kind of very human below the line behavior and where that manifests in kind of gossip and blame and politics and distrust as just organizational friction. And if left completely unchecked, you can end up with a very, very toxic culture that's very hard to unwind. And you're going to have a hard time attracting really good people. And your results will suffer. There's an element where a number of our employees have reached out to me after the trainings and said, oh my God, this came up in my family last week. And I was able to resolve this situation with my mother in a way that I never thought I would be able to. And so, you know, that's awesome. People are having like relationship breakthroughs outside of the office. And I love that. But you know, most importantly, this was like, how do we create an organization that just feels really great to be a part of with very, very minimal relational friction so that we can deliver great value to our customers, enjoy our work in collaborations with our coworkers, feel like we're all on one team, have the tools to notice when these come up to be able to question our assumptions about what we observed because of what state was I in, and then be able to go check out our stories with other people to confirm like, hey, you know, this thing happened, I saw you looked at me weird, and then I made up a story that you must not, you know, trust me. And then they're like, oh no, I was totally spaced out. And you check out the story and you're like, oh, I just completely made up a completely false thing. We do that a lot, by the way. And then you're able to kind of restore trust, right? And check things out with other people. And sometimes they might be like, you know, you're right. I was in a bad mood and I'm sorry about that. And maybe there's an opportunity for relational repair. So, but none of that's possible unless you have, you know, some frameworks. Now, we're only just very lightly scratching the surface. This was like 6 hours of training that I put the company through, but hopefully it gives a little bit of an overview. And if anyone's interested, I highly recommend going to conscious.is, which is their website, and they have a resources section with these great little 3-4 minute videos and all the handouts I talked about. And it'll give you a good start and understanding of the power of these models.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about one of the benefits of this being to reduce organizational friction, because even when we look back at like, okay, what are HR leaders really trying to do? And you're trying to really at this point be more strategic, which oftentimes is helping with organizational effectiveness. How are things running? How are teams working together? Friction is the thing that is stopping all of that from working, right? And we hear a lot of HR leaders in our sessions talk about, well, I don't know how to pitch these kinds of trainings to my CEO or to my executive team. Like, how do I make this sound like not just total fluff, dreamy waste of time, and that this actually matters to the business? And so I think helping them see and understand that the way we work together, the way we talk to one another, how we think about each other actually increases or decreases that friction.
Yes.
And like in just basic physics, like The more friction you have, like the slower and harder it is
100%.
going to be to go forward. But the less friction you have, now you're all moving in sync. And so I think even giving HR leaders that language and perspective around it of this is how you would pitch something like this. This is why it would matter to a business on a strategic level. Because it can always, that can, I think, particularly feel like a hot challenge a lot of leaders come up against.
Yeah. It's actually reminding me of a book by the author Stephen Covey Jr., who wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. Basically, he was saying, and he gave an example of, a transaction someone was making in like the $100 or maybe, $1,000 realm. And there was all this back and forth because there wasn't trust. And then Warren Buffett, who knew this leadership team, basically after an hour meeting, made a multi-billion-dollar investment in a company. It was like, well, why? Because, when there's trust in place, you can move forward with a lot of confidence. And so you think about like the opposite of relational friction inside of our organization is high trust. When there's high trust, things just move with a lot less friction, a lot more ease. Things get done really quickly. And that's the kind of environment that is necessary to win in a very uncertain, fast-moving, competitive world.
Exactly. And the quality of work that gets done in a high trust environment is so different, because you can certainly have, and there are organizations that exist today that have low trust, but still execute, right? Are still trying to get things done. But then what you have happen is a lot of what you described, like, well, maybe I'm working on a project for you, but I don't feel safe telling you. I'm not confident in what I'm building. This maybe isn't working, but I'm just too afraid. So I'm going to give it to you anyway.
Yep.
And then let's just hope it works and nobody catches me. And it's so interesting how the more of those tiny little moments of friction of maybe I won't quite tell the truth here, maybe I won't quite show this thing there, ask for collaboration, end up leading to these huge, huge problems in companies that are so much more expensive to unwind and fix than it would be to just actually invest a little bit of time in figuring out how you build a high trust, high impact organization.
Exactly. And there's many roads to it, this just happens to be one of them that I love.
I love that. For HR leaders who are listening to this today, what is one thing they could do tomorrow to help make their org more effective that falls in line with conscious leadership? I
hadn't brought conscious leadership to 15.5 years ago because a lot of times people will discover these models and say, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm going to go teach this to everyone. And there is I think a lot of work one person must do in order to really embody, take these models and put it into action. And so I recommend, for leaders, HR leaders, executives, to actually take some time to embody the principles yourself before you start to roll it out to a team and culture. It's not an easy thing to be able to learn and catch yourself when you're in these states and to shift and to then be aware of your impact on other people. And so, that's the first step. I would say, take a look at some of the, as I mentioned, the resources on Conscious That Is, see if it resonates with you. If it does, they've got a number of great, programs and a book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. That's really wonderful. And I recommend people sit with it for some number of months and see if it makes an impact in their lives before then rolling it out to an entire organization. The one benefit I will say is that most people who do really embrace it and take it on as a practice will start to see the relationships around them, both at work and otherwise, start to transform for the better.
That's such a beautiful way to think about it, David, because in a world of flavor of the week, what's the leadership model that you're working for? What's like the TikTok video you watch, the sentence, right? So easy to just grab and go on something and say, great, I'm going to throw this out, share this. And I think what I hear when you say that message is a lot of times when we just grab and go on different models that we don't even connect with, but we're trying to bring to different organizations, it can actually be really harmful to our own credibility and our own journey in figuring out who are we as leaders, especially for HR leaders who are already navigating all the stories the world has laid out about them and the things that are there that they're trying to show up differently. And actually just being able to understand okay, if you hear today's message from David and conscious leadership resonates with you, just try it. Before you go out and tell the whole world, just to try it and sit with it and see if it's you is such a much more human way to think about it, which is very in line with all things you, David. It's a very on brand, but also very real answer. I absolutely love that. And I think it's great advice. Thank you again, David, so much for being on here. It's really such a special treat that not only to have you back in the leadership seat at 15.5, but also to have you and your experience here on our podcast. I know our audience is going to be super excited to listen to it and dive a little bit more into conscious leadership. See, it's for them. And if y'all are curious to learn more about David, follow him on LinkedIn. David's got tons of information and blogs out there. Lots of good things you could do to learn more about him and about 15.5.
Thanks so much, Karina.
Thanks, all.
Thanks, everyone.
When it comes to manager effectiveness, where should you focus your time and budget? How How can you tell the difference between an effective manager and an ineffective one? And how can you replicate the success of a good manager at scale? If you find yourself asking these questions a lot, you're in luck. We wrote this guide to help you answer those questions and offer practical tips and tools that can help you measure key talent metrics, improve manager effectiveness, and create a continuous learning environment for your managers. We'll drop a link in the show notes for you to check out.